So with all this being said, how are we going to improve the power? Today, we finally put an end to the question of how much power does a KLX300 make. We're gonna go ahead and put this thing on the dyno. So before you skip ahead, before you watch the rest of the video, go ahead and leave a comment down below what you think the KLX300 will make. We're finally gonna settle the score. I've seen numbers as high as like 37 or something. Even at the crank, that's pretty generous for the 300 here. And then I've heard people, of course, say that the KLX is a slow pig. So, place your comments down below, but we are finally getting dyno numbers for the KLX300, all stock, and we're gonna see what it makes. So that way when we start modding it, we'll have a baseline to see how much power we picked up. But my guess from how much power the KLX250 makes stock and some of the races and comparisons we've done so far, I think the KLX300 probably gonna make around 22 to 23 horsepower at the wheel, stock here. It could surprise me, make a little bit more power than that, but just from the comparisons and stuff that we've ran, races, I think we're at 22 to 23 wheel horsepower. The stock KLX250 made about 18 wheel horsepower, so that's where I'm putting my guess. I guess we'll see here shortly what it makes. All right, and we have made it to cycle tune to get our baseline.
Music to finally take off. If you hate on me, you don't know me at all. Keep my head down, I don't have no regrets. Everybody gets so crazy upset. Sometimes it's better to think and reset. You never know when you'll take your
all right, looks like they're getting it warmed up, and we should get a few holes right now. Shout out to Cycle Tune here for getting the KLX on the dyno. Check them out if you're in the area. Cycle Tune, one word. Now let's go ahead and get home and I'll show you guys the results. All right, everybody, and we're back home here with the final numbers for the KLX300, all stock, like I said. And then for comparison, we got a couple of my other dyno graphs, one for the KX450, which I'll explain why we even have that in this video in a second, and then one for my KLX351. That's been all modded out to the moon. So now, before we get to the numbers, as you guys remember, I was talking about in the first ride on the trails, the KLX300 definitely feels like it has some better top end power than the KLX250. Now the 300 is supposed to have the 300R cams, which definitely helps, but if you remember from my 250, and if you've been following that build, there is an ignition retard up top, which kills the top end power, but the 300 feels like it has something up there. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the numbers. Make sure you stick around after you see the numbers, because there's quite a bit of analytical thought that goes into a dyno graph here, especially with how we're going to move forward on the 300 and what needs to be done to maximize the power out of the bike. All right, here we have it. Here is our horsepower and torque graph. Max power is 22.96 horsepower. I was almost right on the money. 23 horsepower at the wheel. Max torque 15 at engine RPM 7.73, obviously 7,700 RPM. Horsepower is at 8,000 RPM. You can see that on the graph. It peaks here and then it dips down to your red line at 10,500 RPM, almost all the way down to 16 horsepower. Now, that is the same thing that happened with the 250, but it was a little bit different. This is my 351 graph, but retains the shape of a stock graph in terms of peak horsepower. Obviously, we have more torque because of certain things I've done, but my peak power was a little bit after 7,500. After that, it dips down. So, what is causing this dip? Well, Kawasaki is robbing us of power with an ignition retard up top. So, that's great, you may think. All we have to do is get ignition timing tuned and we'll be good to go. Well, problem is, no one has that for the 250, the 300. Like I said in the first ride, this definitely does have some more power up top. As you can see at 7,000 RPM, bam, power shoots up. So if you're thinking of this as a linear graph, here's the slope here, and then 7,000 RPM to 8,000 RPM, the slope is much steeper. So that's what we're feeling on the bike when we get that top end charge, but after that it kind of levels out to 9,000 RPM. Then after that we dip down hard. So that is robbing us of our acceleration numbers, our top end pulling power, and you can see that in the 0 to 60 runs from last video. I was talking about after 52, 55 miles an hour, the bike seems to slow down a bit. It doesn't seem to be accelerating as quickly. With first and second gear, the bike just has the gearing to pull through those gears with the power it's given. You don't really notice a drop off. But in third gear, as the gearing gets longer and longer, you have to deal with wind resistance, all those other factors. You start to notice that the bike seems like it's not accelerating as hard once you get past that 8,000 RPM. So the part that really sucks about this ignition retard is that Kawasaki is really killing themselves with this thing. If they didn't have this ignition retard, I could see the KLX300 easily going above 30 wheel horsepower uncorked. The KLX250 even could easily hit 27 horsepower uncorked. So 300, it's over 30 wheel horsepower just uncorking the bike. That's right up there with the KTM 350, the KX250F, the 250 motocross bikes from the factory. So if they just got rid of that, they could be right up there with the big dogs. But hey, I guess that's what I'm here for, to see if we can't go ahead and fix that. And well, to be honest, everyone's always dogging on the KLX. I've already gotten comments about the 300 saying how it's underpowered, it's a dog, it's a pig, it's slow, etc. But mark my words, we're gonna find a way to fix this, because I am quite determined to do that. So we have my KX450X dyno graph here. The reason we have this graph is because it resembles what we're kind of aiming for here. Red line is at about 11,000-ish RPM, and our peak power is at 10,000 RPM. So 11,500, we'll say it's that. But as you can see, not as bad of a drop off with the 450. Now, does that mean Kawasaki is cutting the power, putting that ignition retard in there because it's a street bike, dual sport bike, they have to deal with emissions? I don't know. Definitely doesn't do the engine any good in terms of power or just really kind of reliability. So now, if you've been following along, you know that with my 351, this is what I have been trying to fix with the bike in order to get maximum power from the bike. We are going to get started on a solution for it, start working on a solution for it, testing different things before the bike blew up or did whatever it did. So with all this being said, how are we going to improve the power? What are we going to do in order to uncork this thing? Well, obviously we're going to get an exhaust for it, and then we need to get a tune on this thing. So moving forward, yes, we're going to uncork this bike, but then after that, after we get that out of the way, we're going to figure out how to get rid of that ignition retard up top with the 300, my bike. It's going to fix it for all the KLXs out there. So if you guys know me, obviously I like to push the limits here. A lot of people have been telling me to get the EJK. I'm not going to go with the EJK. That's a separate video though. It's not going to allow for the customizability that I want with the bikes here. Might be a good idea for those who just want to uncork it a little bit, but a couple of things, it's kind of a one size fits all, and I don't really like not being able to see what's going on behind the scenes with the tune that is loaded onto the EJK. When you're changing the lights, how much is that changing the fueling, air to fuel ratios? I don't like not knowing that, so I'm not going to go with an EJK, but you guys will see shortly what we're going to do here with the 300. And then after that, like I said, we're just going to go hard on trying to figure out what's going on with this ignition retard. So putting an exhaust on here, it should help the low end a bit here. Instead of maybe getting that jump at 7,000 RPM, hopefully we'll level that out a bit so it builds power nice and linearly, get some of that bottom end hit, as you can see with my bike. So now I want to compare this to a WR250 because that was the top dog in terms of dual sports. WR250 made around 28 horsepower to the wheel when it was uncorked. This bike will probably easily make that as well, but again, has so much more potential. If we could uncork it at the top here, we could easily see probably 30 horsepower like my big bore had. So these numbers, how did they compare to the old 250? Well, the old 250 made 18 wheel horsepower stock. With a slip-on, it made about 21. Uncorked, it's about 24 to 25 horsepower. So with a stock 300, we're pretty close to an uncorked KLX250, its power. It just has a little bit more top end charge with the 300 here. But that's why when I rode my friends and this back to back, they felt similar because, well, they're around the same power. This is about 1 horsepower short of an uncorked KLX250. So it's safe to say when this thing gets uncorked, it's gonna be a bit quicker, get some gearing on this thing. It's gonna be a real sweet bike. It's gonna be just about perfect for a lot of people. So there are the numbers. It's kind of funny because a lot of people with my 351 were talking about, well, my 300R will wax that thing. The 300R makes 32 horsepower from the factory, blah, blah, etc. Well, the motors are supposed to be the same between the 300 and the 300R. The only difference is that the 300R probably doesn't have this ignition retard up top like the 300 does. So, stock, it might make around 26 wheel horsepower. I haven't seen one on a dyno to be sure, but regardless, the 300R, when it's uncorked, may make around 30 wheel horsepower, but that's because it's not limited in the top end, most likely like the 351 is, like the 300 is. But it's good that we finally got an answer to the question, because a lot of people are talking about how this thing is a pig, how it's slow, how it has a bunch of horsepower, 38 horsepower. Here we have it now. The question is finally answered. I'm curious to see what a CRF 300L would make. If I had access to one, I would throw it on the dyno. If I had money to buy one, I would buy one so I could do comparisons. But hopefully someone around the area has one maybe. If there's anybody out there with one, hit me up and we could do a video. I feel like there's some valuable information in this video, considering what I know with the KLX platform. I kind of know a lot of the quirks and features of the KLX platform. But if you did enjoy the video or found it useful, be sure to smash that like button, share it to your friends and those who may find it useful as well, because I'm sure a lot of people will. And of course, if you're not subscribed, go down there, hit that subscribe button, get the bell on to keep up with all the action here. More KLX300 action coming soon here. We have a couple of videos that I filmed on the trails with the KX here, and then we will have the KLX351 update. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other projects on this channel. Basically, if you're into motorsports, you're in the right place. But with all that being said, join the club, and I'll see you in the next one.
I'ma blow up.